psychologically, it seems like most people on their deathbed, they're not, I wish I made more money. I wish I had more time with family is what they say. Or I wish I took that shot. I wish I really took that chance, because if I fail, what really is the downside scenario? And I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to help the audience with, because I know that's something that I struggle with personally, is what is the downside scenario? I mean, I'm very fortunate that my wife's extremely supportive. I'm starting to build a stronger network, obviously not on your level, Yona, but, getting there. And I think that's really the big thing that I really just want the audience to take on, and the folks that are listening to my podcast, is you can do this. You can take control, and your best asset is yourself.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further. Welcome back to Weiss Advice. I am your host, as always, on this wonderful journey today, Yona Weiss. And with me is John Blanton. John, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Yona, I am fired up. I am excited. Thank you so much for having me here.
Well, I wouldn't want it any other way. I mean, if we're not fired up in life and in general, it's kind of a waste of a day. I mean, that's really what it is. So we got to be fired up with life. I love what you're doing, John. You're kind of creating a brand around your podcast and around who you are and what you're passionate about. He's the host, if you haven't checked it out yet, the Contrarian Cashflow podcast. Go check it out after you finish this episode, obviously. And let's just get to know John a little bit better. I mean, what have you been working on? You've been in the tech space for many years. You're a real estate investor. You're working on trying to empower people to see a new way to financial freedom. So what's behind that? Let's dig a little deeper.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you allowing me to share the mic with you. And I think, like so many people in life, we kind of set down these paths, and there really isn't any intention behind it. We just kind of start going a direction, and then all of a sudden we end up in our latter stages of life and kind of looking back and saying, hey, why did we do what we did? And why didn't we take a different path, maybe a contrarian path? So from the beginning, so I went to school as pre-med. I mean, I was very fortunate growing up, upper middle class family. I went as pre-med, and I realized I didn't like school very much. And so, through that, and I also saw some risk factors insurance wise, around, the medical profession, and doctors weren't making as much as they were, frankly, as they had in the past. And so I started looking at personal training and physical therapy, and, those folks were making six figures pretty fast, and you didn't necessarily need as much of a degree. And, if you build a business around it. So I started looking at doing that. And so I got out of college, and I was coaching some club baseball teams and some different strength and conditioning classes. And I was kind of excited because I'm like, hey, I'm kind of building this little business. And so I was talking to my parents, and my dad's like, well, how are you going to ever get this to be enough to kind of provide for a family, right. And he's a corporate CFO. So he's corporate through and through. And that's kind of what he's done his whole life. And, I kind of thought about it, and I was like, I mean, he's true to an extent, because most of the coaching and all that stuff is in the evenings, in the mornings, and on the weekends, right? So if I did actually ever want to have a family, I'd have to either choose which one was I willing to sacrifice.
It'd be difficult. And
so at the time I realized, this passion or whatever I have, is probably what I probably should put on the side burner, and then I'll move down the corporate side. It's not all altruistic, because I did speak to the gentleman that owned the gym that I worked at. It was connected to a cardiac hospital. And in my mind, it was kind of the best case scenario. It was, kind of a ritzier part of town. He had all the college football and basketball coaches that were his training clients. And he told me how much he was making. And I was like, whoa, that's not what that's good money. Don't get me wrong. But for the amount of work, he's working 60, 70 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, that was like the ideal scenario, right? I mean, he's connected to a hospital. So he's got patients walking in the door, that need rehabilitation or need some type of training. So fast forward a little bit, it was really challenging for me to find a job. It was really, really hard. It took about 6 months. And I'd interviewed at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is a shoe-in, there's no way I can't get hired at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. Like, it seems like they hire pretty much anybody. Right. And so I'm sitting down in the interview, and I'm talking to this guy, and he's like, so tell me about your leadership experience. So I start talking, I'm like, this is awesome. Like, okay, I got a coach, I do this, I interact with, he's like, well, how's that leadership? And so I start going into it again. He's like, no. How is that leadership? And so I just like sink down in the chair a little bit. And I'm just like, this just isn't going to work, like this just, so I get out and of course, get the call back. Hey, unfortunately it didn't work out.
Right.
And at the time I'm just like dejected because I'm just like, oh my gosh, I couldn't even get hired at Enterprise. They won't even hire me to wash cars. Like I can't even get hired to go wash cars and
You
work,
need leadership
70.
skills to wash cars, right?
Exactly. And so, but that ended up being one of the biggest, benefits of kind of my journey and my path. And so I ended up falling into staffing and recruiting. I had to move cities. I lived in Southern Arizona at the time, but I moved to Phoenix. And I know you're going to get into this a little bit later, but we can talk about this job in more detail. But from there, I was fortunate enough to meet my wife, and we ended up moving across the country. And so, that initial job, I was making $30,000 a year, right? I mean, so I wasn't, I wasn't at a point yet where I could even think about investing or really doing anything. And I was working 70, 75 hours a week.
Wow.
So if you really broke down the hourly rate, it would be pretty tough. And so when we came to North Carolina, that's when I really broke into the tech side. And, I was just fortunate landing spot, kind of broke in and started, making fairly good money pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think my wife and I kind of just thought, hey, we made it. We're both making six figures. We're both doing well. We're young. We're professionals. And so we kind of kicked our feet up a little bit. And I think that's really, where we were for a few years until we had a scenario happen where we were both kind of deemed highly compensated employees. And because of that, it would only allow us to contribute a certain amount to our 401ks. And so we had all this extra cash piling up. We're like, what are we going to do with it?
Mhm.
And so we just started looking at real estate, and that's how we began kind of investing in real estate,
Amazing.
primarily rentals to start.
Yeah. So, I mean, landing out there in North Carolina, especially the Raleigh Durham market, which is obviously it's been growing tremendously in the tech space, right? It's been blossoming and continues to. I mean, the job growth out there is incredible, and the real estate market is hot as well. I mean, when you first, found those first rentals where you were, kind of new into the real estate space, was it something immediately that you realized, wow, hey, wait a second, we can just have another stream of income over here that, it's cash flow that you didn't necessarily have to do a lot of work to do? I mean, how was that first reaction? You guys were young, right? Still young today, but hitting it up, it's kind of like hitting the jackpot almost.
Well, like I said, unfortunately, it took us a little bit of longer of time to kind of get to that point where we were focusing more on personal development. And so at the time, it was no different than the 401k or, any of these other things. It was just like, oh, okay, we're a grown up. We buy this, we pay down the debt as fast as we can, and then all of a sudden we own it free and clear, right? So there was no analytics. We were chasing the 1% rule. It took us about 12 months to get there. So honestly, there wasn't nothing intentional. I was introduced to the broker through a friend. She had a couple properties. It was a condo complex. She was actually living in there. And so we just ended up buying a couple in quick succession because we got them at good prices. And, we're like, hey, this is kind of nice. I know people don't love condos investing wise, but it was kind of nice because we said, oh, we don't have to worry about the exterior at all. And the rental rates for that particular area were pretty strong. So it took a few more years before we started getting a little bit deeper into the actual investing side. And kind of an unfortunate circumstance. And I think a lot of folks have probably seen this before on the corporate side. So I'd been promoted at my job and I was excited. And so, that year I had a certain target to hit for what my territory and my region was. And so we hit it. And so I got a $60,000 bonus for hitting that trajectory and then that tier. And then come late January that year, they said, hey, unfortunately, we're doing a restructuring within the organization. And now you have no ability to earn that bonus anymore. And,
Wow.
And that was just really a shot through the heart. It was like, oh my gosh, like I did everything I could. We hit the numbers. We went on the path we needed to. But I think that really lit that fire inside of me saying, if I'm not personally responsible in taking control of my ability to make income, somebody's always going to have that over me. And regardless of how much you make, 200, 300, 400,000, if somebody else is able to control that. And again, I don't know what what all their reasons were for why they did this, but anybody that's been around larger corporate organizations for a while knows that restructuring is common and it happens. And a lot of the best employees either are shown the door or are shown a gross, decrease in their compensation when their skills probably have actually increased versus, decreased. And so I think that was kind of the awakening saying, if we're not taking control of this and being more intentional about how we can create income outside of this, we're really setting ourselves up for pain moving forward because, again, somebody else is in control. And ironically, it actually happened to my wife too late last year. So thankfully, I was the first one to go through it. So we kind of knew what to feel. But again, it kind of resonated more loud and clear, saying that
Yeah.
what we're doing right now outside of our careers and our incomes from a W-2 perspective is only going to make us, have more peace of mind and be more stable moving forward from an income perspective.
Sure, absolutely. So what's the contrarian? I mean, obviously the brand you're building over here, and which is important. I mean, I'm the biggest proponent of that I know of building a brand, having a brand, make sure that it's clear and your messaging is clear. But where did you come up with the contrarian? Because people hear that word and sometimes it's a turn off for some people, and for some people it's a turn on. It really kind of piques their interest and say, well, there's a contrarian way to have cash flow. Like, what is that about?
Yeah. So as I alluded to earlier, I think, what I think a lot of the audience will resonate kind of in this circumstance, right? You've done what you thought you needed to do to attain this level of success from a societal perspective, right? You're making six figures, maybe you're making quite a bit more than that. You've got the house, you're starting a family. You think you've, attained whatever it is or success, right? And so I thought I was going to feel that way when I made a certain amount of money or, broke 200 or, whatever the case was. And I thought that was going to make me feel different. And ironically, I didn't feel different at all. I felt exactly the same. And I think that was a bit of a letdown. And I thought because I was in sales, well, this is unique. I mean, you know how it goes, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Cold calling and outreach to clients. I mean, it can be a struggle sometimes. And, some days you get dirt kicked in your face and, some days you have some great wins. But I thought, hey, I'm in sales. That's just the nature of sales. Everybody kind of speaks down about, well, sales is a grind. But I started having these conversations with my friends and other folks that had professions like engineers, data scientists, attorneys, and they were having the same challenges and frustrations with their career that I was. And
Hmm.
so that really opened my eyes. And probably similar to yourself, Yona, is I just starting a podcast was always really intriguing. I'm not a very big show me, look at me type person. And so it was a good opportunity to kind of get outside my comfort zone. But the contrarian aspect of it is I feel like people that are able to kind of break out of those societal norms have to think differently. And so the
Hmm.
tagline is think different, earn different, live fulfilled. And so really what I'm trying to do is interview some of the top entrepreneurs within real estate, business, whatever the case is, and really understand what it took them from a mindset perspective so that they were able to get to that level. And then, diversity of income is a huge one, right?
Right.
Regardless if it's real estate, businesses, W-2, whatever the case is. And so I think that's really what spawned the podcast and why the contrarian aspect of it is, because I think most of us would agree, the American dream is you go to high school, you go to college, you get a nice degree, you go get a nice plush job, you're making six figures plus, you have the family, you have the white picket fence, and you just kind of ride off until you retire at 65. And my friends and I, and the majority of probably within your audience that are younger, are saying, I want to live life now at 35. I want to live life now at 40. And so how can I compress that time frame? How can I expedite that? And so all I'm trying to do is steal from others' successes and figure
Yeah.
out how to blend that in my life so I can get there faster.
Absolutely. And it's, that American dream that you talked about is a big fat lie. I mean, it's really what it is, because unfortunately, first of all, you don't know what's going to be when you're 65 years old or 70 or who knows. And even more unfortunately, you may not have all that much to retire on and may not have enough to live off of, even a fixed income. And so it's not really a lot of retired people not really even having enough to live off of, depending on the lifestyle that you've built. So providing people a platform and providing people education and insight into those who have done it and gone outside of the norm, or what quote unquote norm, right? It's not norm, but when society says it is, it becomes. But showing people there are different ways, and I think that's a great opportunity, because there are so many people out there, and similar to myself. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I have this podcast, is just to interview people, talk to people who are successful in whatever they're doing, and just learn from them what it is that they're doing. So I love the fact that you have kind of come to that realization on your own, and you're, with your family and with your own personal finances, but also with your own personal situation, realizing that there's so much more to life beyond retirement. Right? Life is about living now. And so getting control of your finances is a huge part of that, because the more control you have of that, right? Meaning not that it's just coming from, like you mentioned, like someone above you or outside of you, that you can actually create multiple streams of income and create opportunities to make more money. That allows you to have much more freedom to do and to live and to do really what you want. I mean, freedom of time. I mean, I love the fact that I could just hop on a podcast anytime, any day, basically, and enjoy that time with the people on the other end, like yourself.
Yeah, when I'm a little bit of a hip hop fan myself, so I was listening to Tupac and Biggie song, and so they had a quote, "Why am I dying to live if I'm just living to die?" And I just think that resonated so loud and clear. And I think too many of us in life, and I know I was there too, and I kind of think kind of back to your point about retirement, is we just kind of plod along and we're comfortable and we're happy with this mediocre life. And it may be, it may be very strong in some ways, but we know we can do more. And in the research I've done and the personal development I've done since then, psychologically, it seems like most people on their deathbed, they're not, I wish I made more money. I wish I had more time with family is what they say. Or I wish I took that shot. I wish I really took that chance, because if I fail, what really is the downside scenario? And I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to help the audience with, because I know that's something that I struggle with personally, is what is the downside scenario? I mean, I'm very fortunate that my wife's extremely supportive. I'm starting to build a stronger network, obviously not on your level, but getting there. And I think that's really the big thing that I really just want the audience to take on, and the folks that are listening to my podcast, is you can do this. You can take control, and your best asset is yourself. And that's what learning from being in sales has taught me, is my customers aren't buying from the company. Yeah, the company is the conduit for the service or the materials but at the end of the day, they're buying from me. And
Hmm.
so if I'm my most valuable asset, why am I not doing more to position that in a way that I can fully monetize it instead of splitting it with somebody else? And so I think that's the big thing for the audience, is just, you can do it. You just need to either find the way or leverage others' experiences to find that way. And it's not going to be easy.
Nothing that's good that is easy. I mean, I think that's part of the problem with the society that talks about, just getting a job and being comfortable and retiring, et cetera, having a 401k. It's that idea that there is a connection between comfort and pleasure. And so people think of, it was a great rabbi, a teacher of mine many years ago, Rabbi Noah Weinberg, of blessed memory, that he used to say all the time, you need to understand what's the opposite. He used to ask people, like, what's the opposite of pain, right? And so obviously a lot of people will say, what's the opposite of pain? Pleasure, right? That's because that's in kind of, it's integrate. I don't know. It's kind of in our minds from society, pain and pleasure, pain. He says, no, you're wrong. The opposite of pain is not pleasure. The opposite of pain is the lack of pain, right? Is comfort. The pleasure can only be had with pain. Think about it. The most pleasurable things that you have in life come with a lot of pain. And like having a child, right? Children are most probably the biggest pleasure any of us as parents will ever have in our life. And they're also the biggest pain any one of us will ever have in our entire life. And coming to, like you said, right, you want to climb a mountain. That's going to come with a lot of training, a lot of pain. You want to be good at anything. It's going to come with a lot of hard work, right? That's pain. No pain, no gain, right? That's really what it is. But a society that parallels pleasure with comfort, that's the definition of decadence. And that society will never grow, we'll never get anywhere. And so being contrarian to that and realizing I have to get out of my comfort zone. We hear this a lot from growing people. You got to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, because you realize that real life, real pleasure in life only comes by getting out of that comfort zone, by getting the pain, right? And that's the real pleasure. So I totally get what that's about. And it's something that we need to kind of fix our paradigm on that, because don't go after things because they're easy. Go after things because you want them and you realize what the potential can be, and realize that anything good is going to come with struggle and hard work.
That's extremely powerful. And I love that. I mean, I think I always I always refer to they, right? They said we should go to college. They
Right.
said we should save for retirement. But when you really delve in and look at who they is, I mean, so you save for retirement, you don't get to touch the money until you're 65. Well, guess who the custodian, they're getting a cut on that money every year, right? So they're not having to defer any of that, pleasure, whatever you want to call it, right? Any of that income until that time frame. Or same with college, you look at different college amount, the amount of college debt, right? And I saw a statistic saying that, college debt volume only went up when the government got involved in it, right? So the government started doing a lot more in the college loans, and that's when the college debt bubble
Crazy.
started to grow exponentially. So it's just just, I guess, kind of look outside and say, who is they? And when someone's saying, hey, you should do this, just look at what their outcome
Mhm.
is that's positive for them, and just see if that aligns with what you want. And I think that's
Mhm.
the big thing is, don't get caught up in what everyone else is doing and what they want. Just really focus on yourself and understand, why am I doing this and why is this important to me? Which is tough. I'm still working on that.
It is tough. Life is tough. I mean, that's true. If we weren't always constantly working, we wouldn't be getting anywhere. And it's so true. You got to be constantly working, constantly growing, or else you're actually going backwards. You're kind of rescinding. There's no middle ground. There's no middle ground. It's really, you're either, life is like a ladder, or like a slide, right? You're either going up or you're going down, one or the other. So I love that. So, I mean, you found it multifamily, right? Real estate to be one of those outlets as a great source of income. Is that something that you are focusing a lot of time and energy on?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the family, the job obviously
Right.
takes up a lot of time, but outside of that, yeah, I mean, it's full force. I mean, I think real estate's big for me, but right now I kind of consider myself an opportunistic investor. And so we're also looking a lot at small businesses as well. I think if you look at the real estate space, whatever you want to call it, a top or not, everyone can agree that, values are fairly aggressive right now.
Mm.
Based off historical averages.
Right.
And so, I had the same struggle probably a lot of listeners had that are trying to break into that space. They want to get into the multifamily side. And I didn't see myself as wanting to be strictly a capital raiser. I wanted to be an operator. I wanted to be negotiating contracts. And so, kind of going the contrarian path, I was doing everything they thought. I read Joe Fairless's book. I was networking with the brokers, and it got me big fat zero. Everything. Hey, it's not penciling out. It's not penciling out. And that was frustrating. And in my ignorance and my ego, I was like, you know what? These brokers can't be that much better than me. I'm a sales guy. I can pick up the phone. And so I started actually directly contacting sellers. And so I had a couple bites at the apple and had a couple deals fall through. I had one in Central North Carolina that I was working on, and I was super excited about it. It was an attorney, and he was willing to owner finance 80% of the property. It was 20 units. It was a nice little deal. It wasn't a great area, but it wasn't a terrible area. Brick exterior, 80s vintage. So it was a nice property, especially for me, for a starter property. And so uh, I was so excited, and I was driving to take the earnest money check to the attorney to kind of facilitate the deal. And he emails me and is like, "We're passing on the deal."
Oh
And I'm
no.
like, "What do you mean we're passing? You're passing? We've communicated back and forth." And so the lesson that I learned the hard way was, the contract wasn't fully executed because he kept pushing me off and off and off about, oh, this is a deed of trust, and I'm having him draw it up directly. It's not from a lender, it's from me personally. And so since he was an attorney, I was like, well, he knows better than me. And I
Mm,
was already in the thing for like $5,000, right, with the inspections and due diligence and all this stuff. And thankfully the bank wasn't involved. Probably makes sense why he didn't involve the bank, because they would have pushed a little bit harder for the signed PSA.
right.
But even then it was like, oh my gosh. And so after that I had to dust myself off, and just keep trying on it again.
Sure.
And I mean,
You
the
learn a
great
lot.
thing is,
You learn a lot from those first deals.
unfortunately. And so the great thing is, I mean, so what I've learned from sales is, you want to talk to the decision maker, right? And
Mhm.
ultimately the broker is not the decision maker. And not saying there's anything wrong with brokers, and a lot of deals are going to have to transact through brokers. I'm not trying to argue that they don't. The majority of deals, probably 90% of deals, but that 10%, the opportunity there is tremendous. And that's what I've been focusing on. And late last year, I was able to find a property, actually two properties. It was an older seller. She'd actually inherited all of these, and she'd liquidated 160 doors the year prior. And so her motivation was different than mine was. Mine was
Yeah.
financial. Hers was, it was just kind of a thorn in her side, right? So she
Mhm.
had a 14 unit and a four. Her daughter was pregnant, and unfortunately she had gotten COVID. Thankfully she's fine or whatever. But it was obvious that the properties weren't her priority.
Right.
And so I'd called her about the one, and she's like, well, I've got this other one. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to buy that one, but if I can buy it at a low enough price point, I'd like to see what happens here. So anyways, we kind of negotiate back and forth, and was fortunately able to close on those properties. And the smaller one, we already flipped it. We just ended up liquidating it. And so, I mean, just within 60 days, we were able to make about $60,000 net proceeds from just flipping that one over from the price point we bought it at.
That's
And then
great.
the other one, I know, you're helping us out with the cost seg right now on that deal, but it was able to buy it for 390. And I mean, brokers are telling me it should sell somewhere between 900 and 950, just as is, without any type of value add or tweak to it. And
Right.
so when people talk about how competitive the market is right now, the only thing I have to say to them is you're just not trying hard enough. You're not looking
That's
under
awesome.
those contrarian ways. And do you think I want to be, slogging, cold calling these people? Of course not. But, when I look at my net worth and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, one transaction multiplied it. I had a list of, my first mentor had me write down goals. And one of the goals was a certain net worth by 35. And after age 33, I was like, oh no, there's no way I'm going to hit that. And then now, now I've blown it out of the water because we've been able to add a tremendous amount since then. And so I think that's just was a really rude awakening for me, is like, just keep pushing, and it'll happen, but it may not happen the way you think it's supposed to,
Hmm.
and so all those folks out there. And so that's what I'm really trying to show other people and empower others is there's a great opportunity to find deals out there and find motivation from sellers, but you just need to find what that pain point is.
Right.
When you're talking to an investor and you're trying to buy into an investor, the majority of the time they're looking for the top dollar, right?
Yeah,
But not everybody that owns real estate is an investor.
that's
Maybe
right.
they're just a person. And
Hmm.
so start treating them like a person. By the end of the conversation, I mean, she's texted me pictures of her and this new puppy that she got, I mean, so we had a nice little rapport going, and she had enough loss carry forward on the deal that she wasn't going to end up paying any tax on it. So, for her, another $50,000, $100,000, yeah, it would have been nice, but the ease of the transaction and how smoothly it could happen, I took care of everything. I interacted with the property manager. I made it easy on her, and it
Hmm.
just slid right through. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I'm looking at. And again, kind of back to the contrarian piece is, most people aren't willing to do that, but
Right.
I'm starting to help others and empower others to be able to find ways to do that and get creative in a market that's as competitive as it is right now.
Yeah, that's a great story. It is really an awesome story. I want to transition now to the final segment of our show here, which is the final four, where we ask our guests the same four questions. And so the first question for you, John, what is the worst job that you ever had?
Yeah, so it goes back to that first one. I know it's tough to answer questions like this because it's kind of like in an interview. It's like, well, what are your weaknesses? And it's like, well, they're actually strengths. But unfortunately, this is one of those circumstances. So the reason it was a bad job was just like I mentioned, it was, very low pay. And I mean, that company's had plenty of class action lawsuits against them because they deemed everyone as managers because we were managing, contract staff. But anyways, so, but the reason it was so tough was because the hours. So it was I was working to staff nurses on a per diem level in Phoenix. And anyone that knows anything about per diem nurse staffing is I was waking up at 4 a.m. every morning, calling every hospital, asking what availability they had for a nurse to come in today. And then I had to call through all the nurses. And so we had the on-call phone. And so, it could ring at 10 p.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And so it was just really challenging. But,
Wow.
if I hadn't had that experience, I don't think I would be put on the trajectory that I am today. So it was the worst because it was really hard work. And one time I actually had to drive an employee to work because I was just like, I got to get this guy to work. And he was a behavioral health tech. And he actually ended up falling asleep on the shift. And the patient sat up and slapped him in the face.
Oh no.
And so I had to go pick him up because he got fired or released from that. So I had to go pick him up and then drive him home. And I was just like, man, this is just not the right fit long term. But some of those things just turned into funny stories, more than anything. But my work ethic was ingrained, obviously, at that point, and I think that was what the biggest benefit from it was. But
Yeah,
I would never want to do that again.
obviously. I, we definitely learned from those types of jobs for sure. Wow, that's crazy. So, second question for you, we asked, what is a book you've read that's given you a paradigm shift?
Yeah, well, I know we were talking about this one before. So, kind of another funny scenario. So, I had a client for one of the customers that I was working at, and he wrote a book. And so I was like, well, what a great way to build rapport. I can read his book. And so, really, it had nothing to do with personal development or anything. It was more like, hey, how can I build better rapport with this
Right.
customer? He's written a book. Let me read it. And oh my gosh, I'm so fortunate that he wrote that book because it's called Whiskey and Yoga. His name is David Richards, and he's a tremendous author and a good friend now. And he has another book as well out, The Lighthouse Keeper, that it's called around mind mastery. But this first book was kind of just some stories about fulfillment and what you're seeking from life. And my wife and I were on a vacation when I read it, and it really supplanted personal development aspect. And since then, I've been a more ferocious reader than I ever was before, and really focused on how can I become better as a person. And so, Think and Grow Rich is another great one. But I mean, as far as an actual paradigm shift into me personally and starting to focus on personal development,
Mm,
I'm so grateful for him. And I would recommend anybody checking it out because it's a pretty easy read. He's a Marine, but, got a very strong sensitive side. So it's a really good background because he talks about different stories and, different aspects of living all over the world and
sure.
just kind of finding purpose and fulfillment.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. I'm definitely going to add that one to the book list and put it in the show notes for anyone to check out. Whiskey and Yoga by David Richards. Okay. Third question. What is a skill or talent that you would like to learn?
Well, I hope I did a little bit better, on the show so far. But I think the biggest one that's important is learning how to tell my story better, right? And learning how to provide value to the audience that's listening to it, right? What resonates with them? What can they
Mhm.
take from my story to help them? And kind of even what I'm trying to do within the podcast, and that's one thing I'm trying to do is like how can I show this guest story as best as possible so that the audience can take in and have value and actually implement some of these strategies. And so that's what I'm trying to do a better job of is how can I tell my story better in a way that the audience can actually take some of the lessons learned from what I've said and implement them in their lives to become more successful and efficient.
Absolutely. Yeah, storytelling is so key. I mean, it's the best way to give across any message whatsoever. So whether it's your personal story or any story, I mean, if you have in sales, it works really well, right? If you want to sell something, you tell a story about it, and it's great. There's a great guy on LinkedIn, Dale Dupree. I don't know if you've come across him. He's a copy machine salesman. He started off, and then he started his own company called the Sales Rebellion. He's a contrarian. Oh, you should have this guy on your podcast, John, if you haven't. I want to hook you up with
No,
him.
I appreciate. I've heard the name, but I'll need to research him a little bit more. I appreciate the shout out.
He's just a contrarian. Like everything he did was just doing something totally different than what was expected. And he has some incredible stories of just how he did random crazy stuff just to get attention from people. And so that's something I definitely appreciate, the storytelling, because it all comes back to like who you are, right? Who you are, and allowing people to have a little glimpse into that, because the more they know you, the more they can really develop that relationship and eventually do business with you or whatever it's going to be, have some sort of next level to that connection. So that's a great skill to develop. And I think you mentioned this before, but Story Brand, that's something you're working on, right? A great book, Story Brand.
Yeah, well, so I guess I'll give a little bit of a plug. So we do have a virtual book club with Jerome Myers and Logan Freeman and a bunch of really good people out there. So I can give you the link, or if
Yeah.
anybody wants to reach out to me personally, I definitely recommend. A lot of high performers, primarily in the investing space, but obviously, anybody that wants to join is welcome. But yeah, we're reading Story Brand right now, and I mean, just anybody that's looking, I guess, like you said, in any facet, for personal branding or business branding or product branding, it's just a tremendous, tremendous book. And that's why I continue to use and leverage that to tweak my story and continue to try to iteratively make it more compelling.
Awesome. So fourth and final question for you, John, what does success mean to you?
For me, success is just getting better every day, trying to be as true to myself as possible and not really relying on outside validation. I know it's tough. That's something that I continue to struggle with, but being the best husband, being the best father to my children, I mean, that's my main focus. And then working on myself to get better every day. And I know that that's something that I'll continue to work on throughout my entire life. But for me, I think success has to come internal first. And then obviously, it'll kind of turn into some of these external validations and successes that we'll gain, but just continue to work on myself and trying to be the best, like I said, husband and father I can be to my family. And thankfully it seems like I'm doing a pretty good job so far, but I'm sure I can tweak some things a little bit to do a little bit better.
Well, I'm sure you are, and I'm sure you are doing a better job, but we always have to be continually growing and trying to become better. If not, then like we said before, you're just you're going down, you're sliding back down that slide. So appreciate it, John. Where can our listeners find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And thank you again for having me on. I've had a lot of fun. So obviously LinkedIn is a great place to find me. I'm there. Contrariancashflow.com. That's the podcast, or on any other major platforms. Always happy to talk anything contrarian with anybody. So if you guys want to find me there, that's a great place to start, and happy to help in any way that I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely was a pleasure having this conversation. I mean, whenever I think contrarian, I think of John.
Hey, that's branding, right? That's branding.
Exactly.
For better or for worse.
Exactly.
This guy's crazy.
It's like, I'm not, yeah, whatever. Anyways, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much again for spending the time with us today. And to all our listeners, remember, the best advice comes only when you ask. Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn. Send me a DM, a connection request, Yona Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.